At 7:15 p.m. on the 18th of July 2000, the National Weather Service office in Bismarck, North Dakota, issued a tornado warning for Wells County. The storm cell was moving east at approximately 40 miles per hour. Meteorologists noted strong rotation on radar, a classic hook echo signature about 4 miles southwest of the town of Harvey. The warning was broadcast over NOAA weather radio and relayed to local television stations. Law enforcement in surrounding communities were notified. Emergency management in Harvey had already activated their severe weather plan. The storm was coming. At 7:19 p.m., a trained weather spotter stationed on the edge of Harvey reported a funnel cloud. He described it as a dark, rapidly descending column that had not yet reached the ground. He gave his coordinates, approximately 2 miles west of the intersection of U.S. Highway 52 and North Dakota Highway 15. The call was logged by dispatch. The spotter stayed on the line. He reported rotation. He reported dust being lifted from a field. Then he reported debris. The tornado had touched down. At 7:23 p.m., the spotter gave an update. The tornado was on the ground, its visible condensation funnel half a mile wide at the base. It was moving east-northeast toward the outskirts of Harvey. The spotter estimated it as at least an F2 or F3. He could see houses in its path. He could see a mobile home park directly ahead. He told the dispatcher that the park was in the direct line. The dispatcher tried to contact the park manager. No answer. At 7:27 p.m., the tornado entered the southern section of Harvey. It struck a residential area of single-family homes. Roofs were lifted off, walls collapsed. A block of several homes was reduced to rubble within seconds. The tornado then shifted slightly north, moving toward the mobile home park on the east side of town. The park housed 62 mobile homes, many of them older models without tie-downs. The residents had been given less than 10 minutes of warning time. Some had taken shelter in bathtubs, in closets, in a community storm shelter located at the north end of the park. Others did not have time. At 7:31 p.m., the tornado tore through the center row of the mobile home park. Aerial photographs later showed the site looked as if a giant hand had swept the homes off their foundations. One mobile home was carried nearly 150 feet and deposited upside down in a field. A pickup truck was rolled into a ditch. Trees were snapped and debarked. The tornado then crossed the Sheyenne River, weakened slightly, and lifted at 7:38 p.m. near the town of Sheyenne, about 8 miles east-northeast of Harvey. The entire event from touchdown to lift lasted 19 minutes. First responders arrived at the mobile home park at 7:34 p.m. while the tornado was still on the ground 3 miles away. They began a door-to-door search of the damaged homes. They found overturned trailers, gas leaks, downed power lines, and debris scattered for half a mile. They found injured residents staggering through the wreckage, some bleeding from cuts, some disoriented. They also found the body of a woman in her late 50s, pinned under the collapsed frame of her mobile home. She had been in the living room when the tornado struck. She did not have a basement. The storm cellar at the park was at the opposite end. She had no time to reach it. Her name was Linda Roy. She was 56 years old. Over the next hour, search and rescue teams expanded their grid. They found 12 other people with injuries ranging from minor cuts to broken bones. All the injured were transported to the hospital in Harvey, then transferred to larger facilities in Bismarck. No other fatalities were reported. The final death toll remained at 1. What happened? The Harvey tornado was part of a larger outbreak of severe thunderstorms that moved across the northern plains on that July evening. The atmospheric setup was classic for the region. A strong low-pressure system over Montana, a warm front lifting north across the Dakotas, and abundant moisture riding north from the Gulf of Mexico. The result was a highly unstable air mass with strong wind shear. By early afternoon, the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had issued a moderate risk of severe thunderstorms for much of central and eastern North Dakota. At 5:20 p.m., they issued a tornado watch for the area. The watch box included Harvey. When the storm cell began to show rotation on Bismarck radar at 6:58 p.m., the lead forecaster on duty recognized the signature. He issued a severe thunderstorm warning first, then upgraded to a tornado warning 8 minutes later. The warning lead time for Harvey was approximately 18 minutes from the issuance of the tornado warning to the time the tornado crossed the city limits. That was longer than the national average for tornado warnings in 2000, which hovered around 13 minutes. The warnings were effective. Most people in Harvey had some notice, but Linda Roy did not. She had just moved to the mobile home park 2 weeks earlier. She was not familiar with the community's storm shelter plan. Her mobile home was located at 212 East Street, the second unit from the south edge of the park. When the tornado warning was issued, she may have heard it on a portable radio or from a neighbor, but she had no way to get to the shelter. The community shelter required a short walk across an open field. The tornado was already visible from her front door. She made a decision to stay where she was. That decision cost her life. Investigators from the National Weather Service arrived the following morning. They conducted a damage survey along the entire path. They used the enhanced Fujita scale, still relatively new in 2000, to rate the tornado at F3 based on the damage to well-constructed homes and the mobile home park. Estimated maximum wind speeds were between 158 and 206 miles per hour. The path length was measured at 8.2 miles. The average path width was 400 yards, with a maximum width of 670 yards near the mobile home park. The survey team also noted a pattern of structural failure that pointed to a common problem. Mobile homes manufactured before the 1994 HUD code upgrade performed poorly. The tie-downs on Roy's home were insufficient for the wind load. The National Weather Service released a service assessment report 4 months later. It concluded that the warning system had functioned properly. The issuance times were timely, the radar interpretation was accurate, the communication to law enforcement and media was successful. But the report also highlighted an issue that would echo across later tornado disasters. Warnings are only as effective as the human response they generate. In Harvey, many residents did take shelter. Some did not. The report recommended increased public education on mobile home tornado safety, particularly for new residents. It also urged mobile home park owners to install community shelters or to make clear pre-published plans for evacuation. The broader context of the Harvey tornado lies in the history of storm prediction and public communication. In 2000, the National Weather Service was still transitioning from older warning methods to the more modern storm-based warnings that would become standard later in the decade. Doppler radar coverage across North Dakota had improved dramatically in the 190s, but warning dissemination still relied on television, radio, and emergency sirens. Cell phones were common but not yet equipped with weather alerts. The internet was still in its early stages for real-time information. Many people in rural North Dakota relied on NOAA weather radios or local TV stations. The Harvey tornado became a case study in how to bridge the gap between accurate detection and effective public response. The storm itself was not unusual for the region. North Dakota experiences an average of 22 tornadoes per year, most of them weak, but a strong F3 or F4 occurs every few years. The Harvey tornado occurred during a relatively active period in the northern plains, with several other tornadoes reported in the same outbreak across Minnesota and Manitoba. What made Harvey stand out was the tragic simplicity of the fatality: one person in a mobile home with no time to reach a safe place. The story was not about a failure of technology. It was about the limits of protection for people living in housing not designed for extreme wind. Some residents of Harvey later told journalists that they had heard the tornado before they saw it. They described a roar like a freight train. They described the sudden drop in pressure that popped their ears. The survivors in the mobile home park recounted how the wind lifted their homes off the ground, twisted them, and dropped them again. One man who took shelter in a bathtub said the water inside the tub rose up and splashed his face as the house seemed to fly. Another woman recalled seeing her entire living room wall disappear outward while she was still sitting on the couch. The psychological aftermath was significant. Several residents required counseling for post-traumatic stress. The town of Harvey, population fewer than 2,000, became a tight-knit community of grieving neighbors. The state of North Dakota provided emergency assistance funds through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but the damage total was below the threshold for a major disaster declaration. That meant no federal individual assistance was available. The town had to rely on state funds, local donations, and volunteer efforts. The rebuilding process took several years. The mobile home park was ultimately rebuilt with stricter tie-down requirements and a new storm shelter built with grant money. Linda Roy's family filed a civil lawsuit against the park owner, arguing that the shelter was not adequately marked and that the evacuation plan was not communicated to tenants. The case was settled out of court. The terms were not disclosed. Other systems failed in less obvious ways. The tornado warning that had reached most residents did not reach Linda Roy's home because her radio was not tuned to a station that carried the emergency broadcast system. The park did not have an outdoor siren. The neighbor who tried to alert her found the door locked and the television too loud. The warning that saved others did not save her. Her story became a painful detail in a larger discussion about how warning systems can fail at the individual level even when they succeed statistically. How could this have happened? The answer is not one thing but many. The housing, the warning, the human reaction time, the randomness of a tornado's path. The reality that in a storm like Harvey, a difference of 30 seconds could mean life or death. The mobile home park had a storm shelter, but it was located at the north end. The majority of the fatalities and severe injuries occur in mobile homes during tornadoes because those structures offer minimal resistance to strong winds. The Harvey tornado reinforced that lesson. In the years that followed, mobile home parks across the Great Plains began installing community-safe rooms, and National Weather Service outreach programs specifically targeted mobile home residents. The Harvey tornado also underlined the importance of spotter networks. Spotter who called in the funnel at 7:19 p.m. gave Harvey an additional 4 minutes of warning before the tornado struck. That spotter, a volunteer with the Wells County Skywarn program, had been trained 2 years earlier. He knew exactly what to look for. His report was relayed to dispatch, who then called the local television station to break into programming. That chain functioned the way it was designed. Without that spotter, the warning might have come later and more people might have died. The storm itself, the supercell that produced the Harvey tornado, continued moving northeast after lifting near Sheyenne. It redeveloped another tornado later that evening near the town of Starkweather, but that one was weak and caused no damage. The overall outbreak produced a total of 6 tornadoes across North Dakota and Minnesota that day. The Harvey tornado was the strongest. It was also the only one that killed someone. At 7:45 p.m. after the tornado had lifted, the sky over Harvey began to clear. The town was still in darkness, but the storm had passed. Residents emerged from basements, cellars, and bathtubs. They walked outside to see what remained. What they saw was a line of demolished homes, splintered trees, and the wreckage of the mobile home park. The streetlights had gone out. The only light came from car headlights and flashlights. The air was still thick with dust. The sound of sirens mixed with the sound of people calling out names. In the mobile home park, the search continued into the night. They did not find Linda Roy until nearly 9 p.m. when rescue workers lifted a section of flooring and found her body. She was the only person who died. The questions about why she died, despite the warnings, despite the spotter, despite the science that tracked the storm, would take years to answer. At 9 p.m. on the 18th of July 2000, rescue workers in Harvey, North Dakota, recovered the body of Linda Roy. The search was over, but for investigators, the work had just begun. The National Weather Service sent a team to survey the damage the next morning. They measured the tornado's path at 5.2 miles long and 200 yards wide. They estimated the maximum wind speed at 195 miles per hour, placing the storm at the low end of the F4 range on the Fujita scale. The official report listed 1 fatality and 12 injuries. 5 of those injuries were classified as serious. 2 required airlift to hospitals in Bismarck and Fargo. The survey team noted the condition of the mobile home park. 42 homes were destroyed, 17 were damaged beyond repair, 23 were left uninhabitable. The park had been built in the 1970s when tie-down standards were less stringent. Most of the homes were anchored with simple auger anchors driven into the ground, but many of those anchors had pulled loose. Some had rusted over time. In several cases, the anchors were found still attached to torn sections of the home's frame, but the frame itself had twisted apart. The conclusion was clear. The tie-downs performed poorly, but even if they had been perfect, the homes would not have survived a direct hit from an F4 tornado. Mobile homes are not designed to withstand winds above 100 miles per hour. The only safe option is a separate storm shelter or a permanent foundation with basement. Investigators then focused on the warning timeline. At 7:19 p.m., the spotter reported the funnel. At 7:20, the sheriff's dispatch notified the local radio station, KZZJ. At 7:21, the station broke into regular programming with a tornado warning. At 7:23, the National Weather Service issued the official warning. At 7:24, the outdoor siren in Harvey began to sound. At 7:25, the tornado touched down. The warning lead time in Harvey was between 6 and 9 minutes, depending on when a particular resident received the information. That was within the accepted standard for the time. The National Weather Service considered it a success from a forecasting standpoint, but the success was statistical, not individual. Linda Roy lived in a mobile home at the southern end of the park. Her home had a television that was on. She had not heard the siren because the siren was located near the fire department, more than half a mile away, and the wind was blowing from the south. The sound of the approaching storm masked any distant siren. She had not received the radio warning because her radio was tuned to a station out of Minot, which was not carrying the KZZJ broadcast. She had not seen a text alert because the technology did not exist. Her neighbor, a retired farmer named Harold Peterson, saw the funnel from his front porch. He ran to her door, he knocked hard, he shouted. He could hear the television inside loud. He tried the door, it was locked. He pounded again, he could not break the door down. He then ran back to his own home and took shelter in his basement. Later, he would tell reporters that he wished he had thrown a rock through the window. He said he thought about it, but the wind was already so strong that he feared being struck by debris. He did what he could, it was not enough. At 7:27 p.m., the tornado struck the mobile home park. The wind lifted Linda Roy's home off its foundation. The structure rotated in the air, then slammed down on its side. The walls separated from the floor. The roof peeled away. The interior collapsed inward. Linda Roy was thrown against a wall, then buried under the debris. She died instantly from blunt force trauma to the head and chest. The medical examiner later noted that she was found curled in a corner, as if she had been trying to make herself small. The position suggested she had realized the danger in the final seconds. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Emergency responders from Harvey, the Wells County Sheriff's Office, and the North Dakota Highway Patrol arrived within minutes. They were joined by volunteers from surrounding towns. The search was methodical. They went through each wrecked home, calling out names, listening for sounds. They found survivors in bathtubs, under mattresses, in closets. One woman had wrapped herself in a sleeping bag and was found wedged between the refrigerator and a collapsed wall. She had suffered a broken arm and a concussion but survived. A young couple had taken shelter in a small interior bathroom. The bathroom walls had held, though the rest of the home was gone. They emerged with only minor cuts. The elderly man in the next lot had been in his basement. He was unharmed. The family of 4 at the north end of the park had run to the community shelter. They arrived just as the wind began. The shelter door was open. They made it. The shelter at the north end of the park was a concrete block structure built in the 1980s. It was designed to hold 40 people. On the night of the storm, 18 people used it. They all survived. The shelter had no signage. It was not listed in the park's lease agreements. The park owner had never conducted a drill or distributed a map. Linda Roy had moved into the park 3 months earlier. She had never been told where the shelter was. Her lease mentioned a storm area but gave no location. The neighbor who knew about the shelter was the same neighbor who had tried to warn her, but he lived at the opposite end of the park. He did not have time to reach her and return. The legal aftermath began within weeks. Linda Roy's husband, James Roy, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the park owner, a company called North Plains Management. The lawsuit alleged negligence in failing to maintain adequate tie-downs, failing to provide a clearly marked storm shelter, and failing to educate tenants about emergency procedures. The park owner denied the allegations, arguing that the tornado was an act of God and that the tie-downs met the existing state standards. The case went to discovery. Expert witnesses testified that the tie-downs were insufficient for an F4 tornado, but that no standard existed for such extreme winds. The case was settled out of court in 2-0 Rotwo. The terms were confidential. James Roy received an undisclosed amount. He later told a local newspaper that no amount of money could replace his wife. The state of North Dakota responded with legislative action. In 2001, the North Dakota Department of Emergency Services launched a program to fund community storm shelters in mobile home parks. The program provided grants for up to 75% of construction costs. Over the next 5 years, 36 mobile home parks across the state installed new shelters. The Harvey Park received a new shelter at the southern end, near where Linda Roy had lived. It was completed in 2003. The park also replaced all tie-downs with upgraded systems and installed a weather radio in the park office. The National Weather Service used the Harvey tornado as a case study in its outreach programs. The service published a brochure titled Tornado Safety in Mobile Homes, What You Need to Know. It was distributed to every mobile home park in the northern plains. The brochure emphasized that mobile homes are never safe in a tornado and that residents must have a plan to get to a sturdy building or a community shelter. It listed the warning signals, sirens, whether radios, television, and phone calls from neighbors. It also included a checklist for park owners: install signs, conduct drills, maintain a shelter directory. The broader community of Harvey rebuilt slowly. The economic impact was estimated at $5 million in $2,000. The town lost a significant portion of its housing stock. Many residents moved away, unable to afford rebuilding. The population of Harvey, which had been just over 1,800 in the 1990 census, declined to 1,600 by 2010. The mobile home park was rebuilt but never returned to its original size. Today, it has about 30 lots, down from 52 at the time of the tornado. The psychological impact lingered. A study conducted by the University of North Dakota in 2001 surveyed survivors of the Harvey tornado. It found that 23% of respondents met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder 6 months after the storm. The highest rates were among mobile home residents. The study also found that survivors who had received warning were less likely to develop PTSD than those who had not, regardless of whether they were hit. The mere act of knowing the storm was coming seemed to provide some psychological buffer. The Harvey tornado also became a reference point for later tornado disasters in the region. In 2001, an F3 tornado struck the town of Grafton, North Dakota, killing 1 person in a mobile home. In 2003, an F4 tornado hit the town of Maddock, killing 2 in a mobile home park. Each time, the lessons from Harvey were cited: the need for better shelters, the importance of warning dissemination, the vulnerability of the most fragile housing. The pattern was consistent and tragic. By the mid-2000s, the National Weather Service had shifted to storm-based warnings, issued in polygon shapes rather than entire counties. This change was partly influenced by the Harvey experience, where a county-wide warning for Wells County covered a large area but was misinterpreted by some residents as irrelevant because they thought the storm was far away. The polygon warnings allowed forecasters to pinpoint the exact area under immediate threat. In mobile home parks, this meant less ambiguity. But the polygon system was only as good as the means of getting that polygon to the individual. Television stations began using crawls and map overlays. NOAA weather radios became more common. The first generation of cell phone weather alerts began to appear in the late 2000s. Today, the Harvey tornado is remembered as a turning point in tornado safety for mobile home residents. It forced a conversation that had been simmering for decades. The American Mobile Home Association opposed mandatory shelter requirements, arguing that they were too expensive and that tie-downs were sufficient for the weak tornadoes that most mobile homes experience. But the evidence from Harvey and other storms was overwhelming. Weak tornadoes do kill people in mobile homes, and strong tornadoes kill them at a much higher rate. The solution was not stronger tie-downs, but community shelters. In 2005, the Federal Emergency Management Agency published a report titled Guidelines for Community Shelter Funding in Mobile Home Parks. It referenced Harvey specifically. The guidelines encourage states to prioritize grants for parks with high occupant density, older homes, and limited shelter access. North Dakota's program had already been operating for 4 years. Other states followed. Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas rolled out similar programs after their own tornado disasters. By 2010, more than 200 community shelters had been installed in mobile home parks across the United States, directly inspired by the Harvey tornado. The story of Harvey is not a story of a single failure. It is a story of many small gaps: a locked door, a too loud television, a poorly placed siren, a shelter without a sign, a new resident who never saw the lease's storm clause. The gaps aligned to produce a single death. That death could have been prevented by any one of those gaps being closed. If the television had been off, she might have heard the siren. If the siren had been closer, she might have heard it despite the television. If the neighbor's voice had been louder, she might have heard him. If the door had been unlocked, she might have opened it. If the shelter had been marked, she might have known where to go. If she had heard the radio, she might have left earlier. The gaps were not large. They were ordinary. That is what made the story so difficult. The National Weather Service Assessment Report, released in November 2000, included a section titled Individual Case Study, Linda Roy. It was written carefully without assigning blame. It described her actions as typical. She was watching television at home on a stormy evening. She had not heard the warning. She did not leave. The report recommended that mobile home park residents always have a battery-powered weather radio, that park owners install outdoor sirens audible throughout the park, and that tenants be given a map of shelter locations during the lease signing process. The report also noted that many of these recommendations were already standard in other parts of the country, but not in North Dakota at the time. The Harvey tornado remained a reference point for researchers. In 2004, a paper in the journal Weather and Forecasting analyzed the warning response during the Harvey event. It found that the average time between warning issuance and shelter-seeking behavior was 3 minutes for people who had a plan compared to 7 minutes for those who did not. Linda Roy had no plan. She had been in the park for only 3 months. She had never asked about tornado safety. It was not her fault. The system had not educated her. The broader lesson extended beyond mobile homes. The tornado highlighted a fundamental challenge in disaster communication: the difference between a warning being issued and a warning being received. In Harvey, the warning was issued 6 minutes before impact. It was broadcast on one radio station. It was announced on television via crawl. It was sounded on a siren. But not everyone was listening to that station. Not everyone was watching that television channel. Not everyone was in earshot of that siren. The warning was not personalized. It was a broadcast, not a message. Today, wireless emergency alerts push warnings directly to cell phones in the Polygon area. That technology did not exist in 2000, but even now the problem persists. People silence their phones. They ignore alerts. They assume the storm will miss them. The Harvey tornado is a reminder that the final link in the warning chain is human behavior, and that human behavior is shaped by knowledge, experience, and preparation. Linda Roy did not die because the science failed. She died because the science reached the right people at the right time, but it did not reach her. The park where she lives still operates. The new shelter stands at the south end, visible from the main road. It is made of reinforced concrete designed to withstand an F5 tornado. It has a sign on the door. The sign says Storm Shelter in red letters. Inside there are benches, a first aid kit, and a battery-powered radio. The park holds a tornado drill every spring. New residents are given a brochure. The lessons of July 18, 2000 are built into the concrete, the steel, the procedures. The fatal gaps have been closed. But the memory of what happened when they were not closed remains, kept alive by the quiet town of Harvey, by the family of Linda Roy, and by the people who still look at the sky and wonder. At 7:45 p.m. on the evening of the tornado, after the wind had died and the dust had settled, a young television reporter from the local station in Minot arrived in Harvey. She found the mobile home park in ruins. She interviewed survivors. One woman, holding a child, said, "We heard the siren. We ran, we didn't know where the shelter was. We just ran to the back of the park and got into a ditch." That woman was Linda Roy's next-door neighbor. She survived because she left her home at the first sound of the siren. She did not wait. She did not lock her door. She did not turn up the television. She ran. She did not know where she was running, but she moved. That instinct, that willingness to act without complete information saved her. Linda Roy did not have that instinct, or she did, but it came too late. The difference was seconds. The difference was luck. The difference was the shape of the gaps in the system. The Harvey tornado did not change the world. It changed a small town. It changed a single mobile home park. It changed a few pages of a National Weather Service manual. It changed the way a handful of state officials thought about grants. But its story matters because it is a microcosm of every tornado disaster that has ever occurred in a place where people live in fragile homes, where warnings are imperfect, where human behavior is unpredictable. It is a story about a perfect storm of ordinary failures that produced an extraordinary loss. And it is a story about what happens when a community looks at that loss and decides to build something better. The tornado was not the strongest, it was not the widest, it was not the deadliest, but it was the one that happened to Linda Roy. And because of her, the next family living in a mobile home in North Dakota might see a sign, hear a siren, or receive a brochure. The gaps are not gone, they never are, but they are smaller. That is the legacy of Harvey. The legacy of Harvey, however, is not a fixed monument. It is a living set of practices that require constant maintenance. By 2007, the North Dakota Department of Emergency Services had funded 43 community shelters across the state. Each shelter had to meet minimum standards: reinforced concrete or steel ventilation, emergency lighting, capacity based on park occupancy. The program was not mandatory. Park owners could apply for grants, but the process required matching funds. Many did not apply. The cost, even with federal aid, was often several $1,000s per park. For owners operating on thin margins, that was too much. The result was an uneven patchwork of safety. Some parks installed shelters. Others did not. The Harvey tornado had created a model, but model implementation depended on local will. In 2009, the National Weather Service conducted a follow-up survey of mobile home parks in tornado-prone counties. The survey found that less than 40% had a designated storm shelter accessible to all residents. Of those that had a shelter, fewer than half had a written plan for directing residents to it during an emergency. The survey also found that park residents often did not know where the shelter was, even if one existed. The information gap remained. The warning chain was still broken at the last link. What happened in Harvey in 2000 was not an anomaly, it was a pattern. In 2003, a similar scenario played out in a mobile home park in Van Wert, Ohio. An F4 tornado struck at night. The park had a shelter, but the door was locked. Residents pounded on it. No one had keys. 2 people died. In 2007, an EF3 tornado hit a mobile home park in Enterprise, Alabama. The park had no shelter. 8 people died. In 2011, an EF5 tornado devastated a mobile home park in Joplin, Missouri. That park had no shelter. 20 people died in mobile homes during that storm. The deaths were not random. They were predictable. The gaps that killed Linda Roy and Harvey had been identified, studied, and documented, but they had not been closed everywhere. The question that emerged from Harvey was not just about shelters. It was about how warnings are heard, how they are acted upon, and how the most vulnerable are left behind. Mobile home residents are disproportionately poor, elderly, or disabled. They may not own a weather radio. They may not have a cell phone capable of receiving wireless alerts. They may be deaf or hard of hearing. They may be unable to walk quickly to a shelter. The system, even with the best intentions, treats all residents as if they have the same resources, the same mobility, the same awareness. That assumption is false. Linda Roy was a healthy woman in her 40s. She had lived in the park for only a few months. She had not yet learned the routines. She had not yet made friends who would call her. She had not yet tuned into the local radio station that broadcast warnings. She was new, and the system had no mechanism to catch new residents. The lease did not mention tornado safety. The park had no welcome packet. The siren was too far away. These were not failures of technology. They were failures of social infrastructure. In 2013, researchers at the University of North Dakota published a study examining the warning response of mobile home park residents in the Red River Valley. The study interviewed 200 residents across 20 parks. It found that only 20% had a weather radio. 30% relied on their cell phone to receive alerts, but 15% had no alert method at all. They said they did not own a radio, did not watch television, and did not have a cell phone. They relied on a neighbor or a knock on the door. When asked what they would do in a tornado warning, 40% said they would stay in their home. Some said they did not believe tornadoes could hurt them in a mobile home. Others said they had nowhere else to go. The study concluded that education alone was insufficient. Physical infrastructure combined with repeated drills was the only reliable solution. The Harvey tornado also raised a question that remains unsettled. Who is responsible for the safety of mobile home park residents? The federal government issues warnings. The state funds shelters. The county coordinates disaster response. The park owner maintains the property. But none of these actors has a legal duty to ensure that every resident receives a warning and reaches a shelter. The result is a zone of ambiguity where responsibility is diffuse. In a single-family home, the homeowner bears the risk. In a mobile home park, the resident rents the home and the land, but the park owner controls the community spaces. The shelter, if it exists, is on the owner's land. The siren, if it exists, is installed by the owner, but the owner has no obligation to install either. The cost falls on the operator, but the benefit accrues to the resident. This mismatch is a classic market failure. Government intervention is justified, but it is politically difficult. In the years after Harvey, some jurisdictions tried to close the gap through regulation. In 2004, the city of Wichita, Kansas, passed an ordinance requiring all mobile home parks to have a storm shelter or a written evacuation plan approved by the fire marshal. The ordinance was challenged by park owners who argued that it was an unfunded mandate. The case went to court. The city won. The ordinance stood. Other cities, including Oklahoma City and Tulsa, followed. But in rural areas where enforcement is lax and park owners are often unresponsive, the regulations are rarely enforced. The Harvey tornado also changed the way the National Weather Service issues warnings. In 2001, the agency began testing a new warning format that included a polygon shape rather than a county-wide alert. The polygon narrowed the warning area to the specific path of the storm. This reduced false alarms and increased urgency for people in the path. But it also required radar operators to make faster decisions. The first polygon warning was issued in 20's Rotwell. By 2005, the system was national. Harvey had demonstrated that a county-wide warning could cover hundreds of square miles, but the actual tornado was only a few hundred yards wide. People outside the path ignored the warning. People inside the path could not tell if they were at risk. The polygon gave them that distinction. But the polygon could not solve the problem of hearing. A map on a television screen is useless to someone watching a DVD. A polygon on a phone screen is useless to someone who has silenced it. The technology improved, but the human element remained the weakest link. At 7:47 p.m. on July 18, 2000, just 2 minutes after the tornado lifted, the first emergency vehicles arrived at the mobile home park. They were local volunteers. Harvey had a small fire department and a part-time ambulance service. Firefighters had been at the station when the tornado passed. They had taken cover in the station's basement. When the wind stopped, they drove into the park. They found the body of Linda Roy within the first few minutes. She was lying in the open near the shelter. The fire chief later said, if she had made it to the door, she would have made it to the shelter. She was that close. The distance between her final position and the shelter door was 15 feet. The coroner's report listed cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries. The autopsy also revealed that she had died instantly. She did not suffer. That detail, reported by the local newspaper, was a small comfort to her family. Her father, speaking at the funeral, said, she was always a runner. She would have run if she knew where to go. She just didn't know. The funeral was held on a clear, hot day in Harvey. The cemetery was on a hill overlooking the town. The tornado had not touched the cemetery. The graves were undisturbed. The service was attended by more than 300 people, many of whom had never met Linda Roy. They came because they wanted to show that Harvey was a community, that one death was one too many, that they would not forget. The National Weather Service meteorologist who issued the warning attended the funeral. He sat in the back row. He later wrote a private letter to his supervisor describing the feeling of helplessness. I did everything right, he wrote. I saw the storm on radar. I issued the warning. I called the radio station. I looked at the model data, but she still died. I don't know what else I could have done. The supervisor replied, maybe nothing, but next time someone will hear it. That is why we do this work. The work continued. In 2012, the National Weather Service launched a new initiative called Weather Ready Nation. The goal was to improve community resilience by linking forecasters with emergency managers, media, and the public. The concept was that warnings should not end at the television screen. They should end at the shelter door. The initiative included training for mobile home park managers, grant programs for shelter construction, and public education campaigns. The Harvey tornado was cited as a case study in the training materials. In 2016, the North Dakota Department of Emergency Services released a report on mobile home park safety. It found that the number of parks with shelters had increased from 12% in 2001 to 62% in 2005. But the report also noted that the remaining parks were concentrated in the most rural counties, where tornadoes are most common and warning times are shortest. The report included a map. The map showed a cluster of parks in the central part of the state near Harvey that still had no shelter. The very region that had experienced the deadliest tornado in state history was still at risk. The Harvey tornado also left a mark on the psychological landscape. Survivors reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress for years. A study conducted in 2002 found that more than half of the residents of the mobile home park who had been present during the tornado reported difficulty sleeping, intrusive thoughts, and hypervigilance during future storms. Some moved away. Others stayed but installed weather radios and memorized the shelter location. One resident told an interviewer, "I don't watch TV without the radio on now. I don't care if it's a comedy, I need to hear the weather. The town of Harvey itself recovered. The mobile home park was rebuilt. The new homes were better tied down. The new shelter was at the south end, clearly marked. The park manager, who had been unaware of the tornado watch on the night of the storm, resigned. The new manager implemented a written policy. Every new tenant receives a map of the shelter, a weather radio is available for checkout at the office, and a recorded message on the office phone line gives the current weather advisory. The park also installed a second siren closer to the north end so that no residence was more than 100 yards from an audible warning. But the deepest lesson of the Harvey tornado may be about the limits of prediction. The tornado had been forecast. The conditions were classic. The storm was on radar. The warning was issued. And yet one person died because she did not hear it. The gap between a perfect forecast and a perfect outcome is not a science gap. It is a human gap. It is the gap between a weather radio on a shelf and a weather radio that is turned on. It is the gap between a shelter that exists and a shelter that is known. It is the gap between a siren that sounds and a siren that is heard. The Harvey tornado is not a story about a failure of meteorology. It is a story about a failure of communication, and that failure is harder to fix. It requires not just better models but better institutions. It requires landlords who care. It requires residents who prepare. It requires communities that invest. The tornado was a reminder that the most important weather tool is not a radar. It is a neighbor who calls to say, "Get out, now." On the evening of July 18, 2000, that neighbor existed. He was a man named Ron. He lived in the mobile home next to Linda Roy's. He had heard the warning on the radio. He had stepped outside and seen the funnel cloud. He had shouted for her. He had pounded on her door, but she did not open it. He ran to the shelter alone. He survived. He spent the rest of that night searching for her. He found her at dawn. He never moved back to the park. He could not bear to look at the spot where she had died. The Harvey tornado is not a forgotten story in meteorological history. It is not a footnote. It is a reference point. It appears in textbooks, in training courses, in grant applications. It appears every time a mobile home park applies for a shelter. It appears every time a meteorologist makes a tough call. It appears every time a new resident signs a lease and receives a map. The tornado itself is gone, but its presence lingers. It is in the concrete of the shelter. It is in the red letters of the sign. It is in the memory of a woman who ran too late and in the determination of those who run ahead. The question that remains is not whether the gaps can be closed. They can. The question is whether there will be the will to close them park by park, state by state, year by year. The Harvey tornado shows what happens when that will falters. It also shows what is possible when it is restored. The legacy of Harvey is not a tragedy. It is a template. The tragedy was real. The template is the response. On May 22, 2004, a tornado touched down near the town of Rolette, North Dakota, 150 miles northwest of Harvey. The storm was rated an F3 on the Fujita scale. It tracked through a mobile home park at 6:14 p.m. The warning lead time was 17 minutes. The park had two shelters, both built in 2002 with funding from a state grant program established after the Harvey tornado. Every resident had been given a weather radio upon moving in. The radio had been programmed to receive alerts for Rolette County. When the warning was issued, the radios sounded. The sirens activated. Residents moved to the shelters. No one died. The difference between Harvey and Rolette was not the storm, it was the system. The Rolette tornado was not stronger or weaker. It struck a similar community at a similar time of day. But 4 years of policy changes, grant programs, and public education had transformed the response. The National Weather Service in Bismarck had used the Harvey case in every training session since 20's Rune. Emergency managers had visited every mobile home park in the region. The results were measurable. The same storm that killed one person in Harvey left 0 fatalities in Rolette. The families who lived in that park did not know Linda Roy's name, but they were alive because she had died. The Harvey tornado became a catalyst for a broader re-examination of how warnings reach the most vulnerable. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the parent agency of the National Weather Service, allocated additional funding for the specific area message encoding, or SAME, technology in weather radios. Before 2000, only about 20% of weather radios in North Dakota had SAME capability. By 2005, that number had risen to 65%. SAME allowed radios to be programmed to sound only for a specific county or even a specific portion of a county. This reduced the problem of false alarms that caused people to ignore warnings. The Harvey radio had sounded for a tornado watch covering a much larger area. With SAME, it would have sounded only for the warning. Linda Roy might have heard it. The Federal Emergency Management Agency also revised its guidelines for mobile home park shelters. The 2001 edition of the FEMA 361 document, Design and Construction Guidance for Community Safe Rooms, included new language based on the Harvey tornado. It recommended that shelters be placed no more than 150 feet from any home. It required that shelters be clearly marked with reflective signage. It advised that park managers conduct annual drills. These were not mandatory, they were recommendations, but states that wanted federal grant money had to adopt them. North Dakota adopted them in full in 2003. The state legislature passed a bill in 2005 that required all new mobile home parks to include a storm shelter. Existing parks were given a 5-year grace period. The bill was sponsored by a state senator whose district included Harvey. He had attended Linda Roy's funeral. In his floor speech, he said, "We cannot bring back the woman who died, but we can build a shelter for the next woman." The bill passed unanimously. By 2010, all mobile home parks in North Dakota with more than 20 units had a shelter. The Harvey Park had built its new shelter 3 years earlier, but it became the model. The sign on the door was red with white letters. It said "Shelter Tornado Warning." It was visible from every corner of the park. The meteorologist who had issued the warning on July 18, 2000, remained with the National Weather Service. He was promoted to Warning Coordination Meteorologist in 20's Rotwo. In that role, he traveled to communities across the Dakotas, giving presentations on the Harvey tornado. He did not focus on the science. He focused on the human factor. He told audiences about the young woman who did not hear the warning. He showed them the radar image of the hook echo. He played the audio of his own voice recorded on the office line issuing the warning. Then he asked, "How do you get the message to someone who does not have a radio?" The answer was often a neighbor. He encouraged communities to set up telephone trees for mobile home parks. He helped design a system where each park had a designated warning captain who called every resident when a warning was issued. The system was adopted by 43 parks in North Dakota alone, but the gaps remained. In 2007, a study by the University of North Dakota examined the effectiveness of tornado warnings in rural areas. It found that the most common reason people did not take shelter was not that they did not hear the warning. It was that they did not believe it applied to them. This was especially true in mobile home parks, where residents often thought tornadoes could not hit the same place twice. The study cited the Harvey tornado as an example. The park had been hit once. Some survivors thought it was safe. They did not take shelter during later warnings. The study recommended that warning messages include specific references to past events. "A tornado is approaching the same area that was hit in 2000 was more effective than a tornado warning is in effect." The National Weather Service began implementing this recommendation in 2008. Forecasters were trained to reference historical events in their warnings. The language became more specific. Instead of "take shelter now," the warning might say, "A tornado is on the ground headed toward the mobile home park east of Harvey. This is the same area that was hit in 2000. Take shelter immediately." The change was subtle, but it saved lives. In 2009, a tornado struck a mobile home park near Minot. The warning included a reference to a 1999 tornado that had killed 3 people in the same county. Every resident took shelter. No one died. The Harvey tornado also reshaped how the media covered severe weather. Local television stations in North Dakota started dedicating more airtime to mobile home park safety during tornado season. They produced special reports. They interviewed survivors. They showed the shelter sign. They explained how to program a weather radio. One station, KFYR in Bismarck, launched an annual campaign called "Be Ready, Not Sorry." The campaign distributed free weather radios to low-income residents of mobile home parks. By 2015, more than 10,000 radios had been given away. The cost was covered by donations from viewers and a grant from the State Emergency Management Agency. The radio that Linda Roy owned had been given to her by her father. It was an older model without same. It had a single alert tone for all warnings. On the night of the tornado, it had sounded for the watch. She may have assumed that was the only alert. She may have turned it off. The radio was never found. It was likely destroyed in the tornado. But the question of whether it was on or off, whether she heard it or not, became a central point in the discussions that followed. The coroner's report noted that her ears showed no signs of acoustic trauma, which would have been present if she had been exposed to a loud alarm immediately before death. That suggested she had not been near a sounding radio. It was a detail that haunted the meteorologist. He often said, "If I had known she had a radio, I would have called her myself." But he did not know. The system did not allow him to know. After the Harvey tornado, the National Weather Service explored ways to directly contact individuals in affected areas. The idea of using cell phone location data to send targeted warnings was discussed, but the technology was not yet available. The Wireless Emergency Alert System, known as WEA, was not deployed until 2010. When it was launched, the Harvey tornado was cited as a case study in the FCC's rulemaking process. The FCC required that WEA messages be used for imminent threats like tornadoes. Linda Roy's name was mentioned in the docket. A commissioner said, "We do not want another woman dying because she did not receive a warning." The first WEA tornado warning was issued in 2003. By 2018, more than 90% of Americans had a cell phone that could receive these alerts. The system had limitations. It could not reach phones in dead zones. It could not reach phones that were turned off. But it closed the gap for many. In a mobile home park, a cell phone that buzzes in a pocket can be the difference between life and death. The Harvey tornado had taught the nation that the warning must follow the person, not wait for the person to follow the warning. The personal legacy of Linda Roy extended beyond policy. Her family established a scholarship at the University of North Dakota in her name, awarded each year to a student studying emergency management or meteorology. The recipient receives a weather radio along with the scholarship. The first recipient in 2002 was a young woman from a town near Harvey. She later became a meteorologist for the National Weather Service. In her office, she kept a photograph of the shelter sign in Harvey. She told a reporter, "Every time I issue a warning, I think of Linda, I think of my own family, I want them to hear it." That photograph now hangs in the lobby of the National Weather Service office in Bismarck. It is a simple image, a red sign on a white post, the word shelter in bold letters, below it in smaller type, in memory of Linda Roy 1978200. The sign was installed in 2001, replaced in 2005 after weather damage, and replaced again in 2015 with a more durable aluminum panel. It stands at the entrance to the mobile home park. The park itself has been renamed. It is now called Roy's Run, a name chosen by the residents. They wanted to honor the woman who ran too late. The name is a reminder that running matters, but only if you know where to run. The Harvey tornado is no longer a news story. It is a historical reference point. It appears in textbooks on emergency management. It appears in training courses for meteorologists. It appears in grant applications for shelter construction. It appears every time the National Weather Service reviews its warning procedures. It appears every time a mobile home park manager hands a new resident a map of the shelter. The tornado itself was a brief event, lasting less than 10 minutes, covering less than 6 miles, but its impact has extended for decades. It changed how North Dakota prepares for storms. It changed how the nation thinks about mobile home safety. It changed the life of a meteorologist who still carries the guilt of a warning that was not heard. In 2020, on the 20th anniversary of the tornado, the town of Harvey held a memorial service at the shelter. The meteorologist, now retired, returned to speak. He stood beside the red sign. He told the crowd, "I will never forget that night. I will never forget the sound of her father's voice. But I will also never forget the letters I received from people who said they built a shelter because of her. I will never forget the families who are alive today because of that storm." He paused. He looked at the sign. She did not die for nothing. The service ended with a moment of silence. The tornado sirens did not sound. They were not tested that day. The silence was intentional. It was a chance to listen, to hear the wind, to remember that nature is not predictable, that warnings are not guarantees. A single life lost because a radio was not turned on can change a state, a region, a generation. The Harvey tornado is not a story of failure. It is a story of adaptation. It is a story of how a community, a profession, and a country learned from one woman's death. It is a story that continues to be written every time a new resident receives a map, every time a weather radio sounds in a mobile home, every time a warning is issued with the memory of Linda Roy in the forecaster's mind. The tornado is gone, the shelter remains, the lesson endures. In 2022, a new mobile home park was built 20 miles south of Harvey. The developer consulted with the State Emergency Management Office before breaking ground. The park was designed with a concrete storm shelter at its center, large enough to hold every resident. The shelter had backup lighting, a weather radio, and a direct phone line to the county emergency manager. The developer said later that the design was inspired by the Harvey tornado. He had read the NWS case study. He had seen the photograph of the red sign. He told a local newspaper, "If you build homes without a shelter, you are building a death trap." We are not doing that here. That same year, the National Weather Service launched a new initiative called Weather Ready Nation. One of its core components was community outreach to mobile home parks. The program provided free shelter planning kits, including maps, checklists, and templates for emergency drills. The Harvey tornado was listed as a key motivation in the program's internal documentation. The meteorologist who had issued the warning for Harvey was now a senior advisor for the initiative. He traveled to parks across the northern plains, standing in front of residents and telling them the story. He showed them the sign. He asked them to program their radios. He asked them to know the shelter. He asked them to run. The meteorologist retired in 2003. His last day was marked by a small ceremony at the Bismarck office. His colleagues presented him with a framed copy of the shelter sign photograph. Underneath the image, someone had printed the words, "Run, Linda, run." He said nothing. He simply nodded. He took the frame and carried it out to his car. He drove home. He hung the photograph in his study next to a clock that had stopped at 9:03 on the night of the tornado. The clock had been recovered from the debris. It had been given to him by Linda's father. He had kept it for 23 years. He had never repaired it. The time was frozen. The clock remains frozen. The sign remains in place. The shelter remains open. Every spring, the county emergency manager visits Roy's Run to test the shelter's ventilation and check the radio. He speaks to new residents. He tells them about the night in 2000. He tells them about the woman who ran. He points to the shelter and says, "If the sirens go off, you come here. You do not wait. You do not check your phone. You run." The residents nod. They understand. The lesson has been passed down. The tornado is gone, but the memory is not. The memory has become a protocol. The protocol has become a habit. The habit has saved lives. In 2024, a severe thunderstorm warning was issued for the Harvey area. Residents of Roy's Run moved to the shelter within minutes. No one was hurt. The storm passed. The shelter emptied. The families returned to their homes. The cycle of preparation and survival continued. The story of the Harvey tornado is not a story about one storm. It is a story about how a single tragedy can ripple outward across decades, across jurisdictions, across generations. The meteorologist still wonders about the radio. The father still visits the grave. The mother still speaks at schools, but the system has changed. The warning has become louder. The shelter has become stronger. The memory has become action. And in that action, Linda Roy lives on not as a statistic, but as a reason. A reason to build, a reason to learn, a reason to run.